The amber fields of Verdania stretched endlessly beneath twin suns, their golden waves rippling in the artificial breeze generated by atmospheric processors. Nira Salas knelt beside her son's grave, her fingers tracing the simple stone marker that bore only his name, Kale Salas, aged 19. The flowers she'd brought native crimson blooms that Kale had loved wilted quickly, in the harsh light, their petals falling like tears onto the freshly turned earth. "I should have stopped you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of harvest machines. "I should have known they would cut corners." 6 months had passed since the mining accident that claimed her boy, yet the pain remained, as sharp as broken glass in her chest. Kale had been working the night shift at the Nexus Industries extraction facility, eager to earn enough credits to pay for advanced engineering courses. He'd dreamed of designing starships, of exploring the outer ring territories beyond Verdania's agricultural boundaries. Instead, he died when a support beam manufactured with substandard materials had collapsed, crushing him instantly along with 7 other workers. Nexus Industries had paid the standard compensation, a sum that barely covered funeral expenses. Their legal team had descended like vultures, forcing families to sign documents that absolved the corporation of any wrongdoing. Most had complied, desperate and grieving, but Nira had refused, and for her defiance, she'd been blacklisted from her job at the local grain processing center. Now she survived by selling vegetables from her small garden, watching helplessly as Nexus expanded their operations across Verdania. New extraction sites opened weekly, each one bringing more workers, more accidents, more grieving families. The corporation's influence had grown so vast that even the planetary government deferred to their wishes. As evening approached, Nira made her way back to her modest dwelling on the outskirts of Harvest Town. The settlement had grown rapidly around the Nexus facilities, a sprawling collection of prefabricated housing units and service buildings that lacked any sense of permanence or community. Everything here existed to serve the corporation's needs. Her neighbor, Tomas Reeves, was tending his own small garden when she passed, his weathered face creased with concern. As he noticed her red-rimmed eyes, visited the cemetery again, he asked gently. Tomas had lost his daughter in a chemical spill 3 years earlier, another Nexus accident. Nira nodded, unable to trust her voice. Tomas set down his watering can and approached her, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he placed them on her shoulders. "You can't keep torturing yourself like this," he said. "Kale wouldn't want." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't tell me what he would want." He wanted to live, Tomas. He wanted to build ships and explore the galaxy. Instead, he's dead because some executive decided to save a few credits on proper structural supports. Tomas's expression hardened. "You think I don't understand?" Mira was only 16 when their chemical leak poisoned half the water supply. 16. Nira, she had her whole life ahead of her. The pain in his voice mirrored her own, and suddenly the anger drained out of her. They stood together in the fading light, to parents bound by shared grief and helpless rage. "What can we do?" Nira asked, her voice breaking. "They're too powerful, too connected. The government won't touch them. The courts are bought, and anyone who speaks out gets silenced or disappears." "I don't know," Tomas admitted, "but I do know that giving up honors no one. Your boy was special." Nira, everyone could see it. The way he talked about the future, about making things better. Maybe the answer isn't here on Verdania. That night, alone in her small kitchen, Nira stared at the holopad displaying Kel's final project blueprints for an improved atmospheric processor that would have been safer and more efficient than the current Nexus models. His professor had called it brilliant, revolutionary even. The irony wasn't lost on her that her son had been trying to improve the very technology that the corporation used to exploit worlds like Verdania. She scrolled through his personal files, finding messages to friends at the Technical Academy, research notes, and a half-finished application to the prestigious Galactic Engineering Institute. On the core world of Synthesis Prime, he'd been saving every credit, working dangerous jobs to afford the application fee. In the final folder, she found something that made her breath catch: a detailed analysis of safety violations at Nexus facilities across the sector. Kale had been documenting everything: faulty equipment, ignored maintenance schedules, suppressed incident reports. He'd been building a case, gathering evidence that could have brought down the entire operation. The file was dated just 3 days before his death. Nira's hands trembled as she read through her son's meticulous notes. He'd discovered a pattern of negligence spanning dozens of worlds, affecting thousands of workers. More importantly, he'd identified the specific individuals responsible, a network of executives and bureaucrats who had systematically prioritized profits over human lives. At the bottom of the file was a message, clearly intended for her. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I know you worry about my work at the facility, but someone needs to document what Nexus is doing. They can't keep getting away with murder. I've sent copies of this data to 3 different locations. Check the hidden compartment behind my desk. Use it. Make them pay. I love you." Kale, tears streaming down her face. Nira rushed to Kel's room and found the compartment exactly where he'd described. Inside were 3 data crystals and a list of contacts, journalists, activists, and politicians who might be willing to listen. For the first time since the accident, Nira felt something other than grief. Purpose burned in her chest like a small but fierce flame. Her son had died trying to expose the truth, but his work would not die with him. Tomorrow, she would begin making contacts. She would find allies, gather more evidence, and ensure that Kel's sacrifice meant something. Nexus Industries had taken her son, but they had also made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated a mother's love and her capacity for vengeance. The twin suns set over Verdania's golden fields, but in Nira Salas's heart, a new dawn was breaking. The cargo bay of the freighter Stellar Drift reeked of recycled air and engine coolant, but Jackson Vale had smelled worse. He lay on his back beneath the ship's primary drive assembly, sparks cascading around him as he welded a replacement coupling into place. The work was honest, if temporary, exactly what he needed after his last employment had ended in spectacular fashion. "You about done under there, Vale?" called Captain Hendricks from the bay entrance. "We dock at Meridian Station in 6 hours, and I need those engines purring like a satisfied house cat." "Almost finished," Jackson replied, his voice muffled by the plasma mask. "Though I'd recommend replacing the entire drive coupling assembly. Next time you're in port, this is a patch job at best." Hendricks grunted acknowledgement and wandered off, leaving Jackson alone with his thoughts and the rhythmic hum of the ship's systems. At 28, he'd already worked on more vessels than most engineers saw in a lifetime. His talent for improvisation and his willingness to ask no questions had made him valuable to captains operating in the gray areas of galactic commerce. The problem was his mouth. Jackson had never learned to keep his opinions to himself, especially when he witnessed corners being cut that put lives at risk. His last position aboard a Nexus Industries transport had ended when he'd refused to sign off on a reactor modification that violated basic safety protocols. The chief engineer had tried to force the issue. Jackson had responded by uploading the violation reports to the Galactic Safety Commission before jumping ship at the next port. Now he was blacklisted from any major corporation, reduced to taking short-term contracts with independent operators. Not that he minded the freedom corporate life had always chafed against his nature. The coupling finally seated properly, and Jackson slid out from beneath the drive assembly. He was cleaning his tools when his personal comm unit chirped with an incoming message. The sender's identity made him pause. Marcus Webb, an old friend from the academy who now worked as a freelance data analyst. "Jax, I've got something you need to see. Remember that safety database you asked me to monitor? There's been some unusual activity. Someone's been uploading massive amounts of violation data from Nexus facilities across the sector. The uploads are coming from Verdania Agricultural World, Middle Rim. Thought you'd be interested given your recent disagreement with Nexus." Attached to the message was a data packet containing preliminary analysis of the uploads. Jackson's eyes widened as he scrolled through the information. The violations were extensive and systematic: faulty equipment, ignored maintenance schedules, suppressed accident reports. Worse, they showed a clear pattern of escalation over the past 5 years. But what caught his attention was the quality of the analysis. Whoever was compiling this data understood engineering principles at a level that impressed even Jackson. The documentation was thorough, technical, and damning. The final file in the packet made his blood run cold. It was an incident report from a Nexus extraction facility on Verdania, detailing a structural collapse that had killed 8 workers. The report blamed equipment failure, but the attached engineering analysis told a different story. Someone had substituted substandard materials, ignored stress calculations, and falsified inspection records. One name on the casualty list stood out: Cale Salas, age 19, engineering apprentice. The technical analysis bore the same signature as the other uploaded files. The kid had been documenting violations right up until his death, and possibly because of it. Jackson leaned back against a cargo container, his mind racing. He'd seen corporate negligence before, but this was different. This was murder disguised as accidents, repeated across dozens of worlds, and somewhere on Verdania, someone was continuing Cale Salas's work. "Captain," he called out, knowing Hendricks would still be somewhere in the ship. "Change of plans. I need passage to Verdania." Hendricks appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with suspicion. "Verdania, that's way off our route. What's your interest in that dirt farm?" "Personal business," Jackson replied, already starting to gather his gear. "I'll pay standard passenger rates plus a bonus for the detour. Personal business that involves Nexus Industries, I'm guessing." Hendricks's expression had shifted from suspicion to concern. "Listen, Vale, I like you. You do good work and you don't ask too many questions about my cargo manifests. But I've got a family to feed, and Nexus has a long reach. I can't afford to get crossways with them." Jackson understood. Independent captains lived on the margins, and corporate retaliation could destroy them overnight. "Just drop me at Meridian Station. I'll find another way." 3 days later, Jackson stood in the crowded docking bay of Meridian Station, watching passenger transports arrive and depart. Finding passage to Verdania had proven more difficult than expected. The agricultural world was considered a backwater, serviced primarily by Nexus corporate vessels and a few independent freight haulers. Finally, he managed to book passage aboard the Green Harvest, a converted cargo hauler that ran supplies to farming colonies. The ship was old and cramped, but the captain, Elena Vasquez, asked no questions about his destination or motives. The journey to Verdania took for standard days, during which Jackson spent most of his time in the ship's tiny engineering section, helping Vasquez maintain the aging systems. She was a good captain, careful and experienced, but her ship was held together by determination and prayer. "What's your business on Verdania?" she asked one evening as they worked together replacing worn power conduits. "Meeting someone," Jackson replied, which was technically true. He'd been trying to trace the source of the data uploads, cross-referencing the technical signatures with Academy records. The search had led him to Cale Salas's academic files, and from there, to his family. "Nexus business," Vasquez's tone carried a warning. "You could say that." Jackson paused in his work, studying the captain's expression. "You've had trouble with them." Vasquez's laugh was bitter. "They control half the agricultural trade in this sector. Independent haulers like me survive on their scraps, and only as long as we stay in line. I've seen what happens to captains who ask too many questions or charge too much for their services." When the Green Harvest finally dropped out of hyperspace, above Verdania, Jackson felt his breath catch. The planet was beautiful, a blue-green marble swirled with white clouds, its continents painted in shades of gold and amber, but scattered across the surface were the dark scars of industrial extraction sites, growing like cancers on the pristine landscape. "Nexus has been busy," Vasquez observed grimly as they approached the main spaceport. "Lot more extraction operations than the last time I was here." Jackson secured passage on a local transport to Harvest Town, where the uploaded data had originated. The town was exactly what he'd expected: a utilitarian collection of prefabricated buildings surrounding a massive Nexus facility. Everything was functional but temporary, built to serve corporate needs rather than create a community. Finding Nira Salas proved easier than expected. In a town of 10,000 people, everyone knew the woman who'd lost her son and refused to Sign the settlement agreement. The locals spoke of her with a mixture of sympathy and wariness. Grief had made her unpredictable, dangerous to the carefully maintained status quo. Jackson found her at the local market, selling vegetables from a small stall. She was younger than he'd expected, probably early 40s, with dark hair streaked with premature gray and eyes that held the particular kind of pain that came from losing a child. But there was something else in those eyes, of fierce intelligence and determination that reminded him powerfully of her son's technical analysis. Mrs. Salas? He approached her stall carefully, aware that his off-world clothing marked him as an outsider. My name is Jackson Vale. I'm an engineer. I knew your son's work. The change in her expression was immediate and dramatic. Wariness shifted to sharp attention, then to something that might have been hope. You're not Nexus, she said. It wasn't a question. Definitely not, Jackson confirmed. In fact, they'd probably prefer I stayed far away from here. I've seen Kel's safety analysis. It's brilliant work. More than that, it's evidence. Nira's hands stilled on the vegetables she'd been arranging. Evidence that no one wants to hear. Maybe, or maybe you just haven't found the right people yet. Jackson glanced around the market, noting the Nexus security personnel who seemed to be everywhere. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? 20 minutes later, they sat in Nira's small kitchen, the afternoon light streaming through windows that looked out on the golden fields beyond the town. She'd made tea, real tea, not the synthetic stuff common on most worlds, and Jackson found himself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Kale was going to be something special, Nira said, her voice soft with memory. Even as a child, he could look at a machine and understand how it worked, how to make it better. The academy professors said he had the potential to revolutionize atmospheric processing technology. I've read his technical papers, Jackson said. They're not the work of a student. That analysis of the extraction facility violations, it would have taken me twice as long to compile that data, and I've been doing this for years. Nira's smile was sad but proud. He was documenting everything, building a case. I think they killed him for it. The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrible. Jackson had the executive boardroom on the 97th floor of Nexus Tower, commanded a breathtaking view of Synthesis Prime's sprawling metropolis. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Serafina Cross could see the gleaming spires of the corporate district stretching toward the horizon, a testament to humanity's expansion across the galaxy. But today, the view brought her no pleasure. She sat at the polished obsidian table, her tablet displaying quarterly reports that painted an increasingly troubling picture. Profit margins were up across all sectors, extraction efficiency had reached record levels, and stock prices continued their steady climb. By every metric that mattered to the board, Nexus Industries was thriving. Yet Serafina couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Excellent work on the Verdania expansion, her father's voice cut through her thoughts. Damian Cross, CEO and founder of Nexus Industries, stood at the head of the table like a king addressing his court. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. Production is up 40% over last quarter. Round the table, department heads nodded and smiled, eager to bask in their leader's approval. Serafina watched their faces, noting the careful calculation behind every expression. These were people who had learned to survive in her father's world, where success was measured in credits and failure was not tolerated. What about the incident? Reports, Serafina asked, her voice cutting through the congratulatory murmur. I've been reviewing the safety data, and there seems to be an unusual spike in accidents across our extraction facilities. The room went silent. Heads turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to barely concealed annoyance. At 26, Serafina was already being groomed to take over the company, but her tendency to ask uncomfortable questions had made her something of an outsider within her own family's empire. Her father's smile never wavered, but Serafina caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Accidents are unfortunate, but inevitable in industrial operations, my dear. The important thing is that we learn from them and improve our safety protocols, have we? Serafina pressed, consulting her tablet. because the data suggests that accident rates have actually increased over the past 2 years, even as we've expanded operations. That doesn't indicate learning to me. Director of Operations Marcus Thorne cleared his throat nervously. He was a thin, nervous man who had held his position through a combination of competence and willingness to overlook inconvenient details. Miss Cross, if I may, the correlation you're noting is likely due to the expanded scope of our operations. More facilities naturally means more incidents, even if the per-facility rate remains constant. Except the per-facility rate isn't constant, Serafina replied, pulling up a holographic display that materialized above the table. The data was damning: accident rates, fatality statistics, and safety violation reports that painted a clear picture of declining standards. It's increasing exponentially. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, her father spoke, his tone carrying a subtle warning. Serafina, perhaps we should discuss this privately. The board has other matters to address. But Serafina was past the point of backing down gracefully. Actually, I think the board should hear this, especially since some of these incidents appear to involve criminal negligence. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged meaningful glances. Director Thorne went pale, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. That's enough, her father's voice cracked like a whip, carrying an authority that had cowed entire planetary governments. This meeting is adjourned. Serafina, my office. Now. The walk to Damien Cross's private office felt like a funeral march. Serafina had challenged her father before, but never so publicly, never in front of the entire board. She knew she'd crossed a line, but the weight of the evidence she'd been reviewing made silence impossible. The office itself was a monument to corporate power, rare hardwoods from a dozen worlds, artifacts from humanity's greatest achievements, and a desk that had once belonged to the first Galactic Trade Commissioner. Her father moved behind that desk like a general taking position for battle. Sit, he commanded, his voice deceptively calm, and explain to me why you just humiliated me in front of the board. Serafina remained standing, her tablet clutched in her hands like a shield. Because people are dying, Father, our people. And instead of addressing it, we're covering it up. Covering it up. Damien's laugh was cold and humorless. Serafina, we employ 3 million people across 100 worlds. Do you have any idea what kind of statistical casualties that represents? Deaths, injuries, accidents, they're inevitable. Not at this rate, not with this pattern. She activated her tablet, projecting the data onto his office wall. Look at this. Structural failures using substandard materials. Chemical spills caused by skipped maintenance schedules. Life support failures that could have been prevented with proper inspections. This isn't statistical inevitability, it's systematic negligence. For a moment, something flickered in her father's eyes. Not guilt. Serafina wasn't sure he was capable of that emotion, but perhaps a glimmer of recognition. Then his expression hardened again. You're looking at this from an academic perspective, he said, moving to the window and gazing out at his empire. You see numbers on a screen and think they represent some moral failing. What you don't understand is the bigger picture. Then explain it to me. He turned back to her, his expression softer, but no less determined. Every credit we save on construction, every efficiency we gain through streamlined procedures, every shortcut that keeps us competitive at all serves a greater purpose. Nexus Industries provides food, energy, and raw materials to over 1 billion people. If we become inefficient, if we price ourselves out of the market through excessive safety measures, someone else will take our place, someone who might be far less scrupulous. So we're the lesser evil. Serafina couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. That's your justification for letting people die. That's my justification for keeping humanity fed and powered while maintaining galactic stability. His voice rose slightly, revealing the passion that had built an interstellar empire. Do you think our competitors care about worker safety? Do you think the Centauri Collective or the Outer Rim cartels lose sleep over a few industrial accidents? Serafina stared at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The man she'd idolized as a child, the brilliant entrepreneur who'd built something magnificent from nothing. was also capable of calculating human lives in terms of profit margins. There's someone uploading our violation data to public databases, she said quietly. Safety reports, accident investigations, internal memos. Someone with access to our most sensitive files. The change in her father's demeanor was immediate and alarming. The corporate statesman vanished, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. What did you say? The data I've been reviewing, it's not just from our internal reports. Someone has been systematically documenting our violations and broadcasting them to watchdog groups, journalists, and regulatory agencies. Whoever it is, they have detailed technical knowledge and access to classified information. Damian Cross moved to his desk and activated a secure communication channel. Get me Director Voss. Immediately. Within minutes, Helena Voss entered the office. She was Nexus Industries' head of corporate security, a cold, efficient woman who had once worked for military intelligence. Her presence always made Serafina uncomfortable, though she'd never been able to articulate why. We have a leak, Damian said without preamble. Someone is uploading classified safety data to external networks. I want them found and stopped. Voss nodded, her pale eyes calculating. Do we have any leads on the source? The uploads appear to be originating from our Verdania facility, Serafina said, then immediately regretted speaking when both adults turned to stare at her. I mean, that's where the data trail leads. Verdania, Voss mused. Wasn't there an incident there recently? A structural collapse, several casualties. Damian confirmed. Nothing unusual. Standard compensation packages were distributed, except one family refused to sign, Voss said, her voice carrying the tone of someone reciting facts from memory. Nira Salas, her son was killed in the collapse. She's been asking uncomfortable questions. Serafina felt something cold settle in her stomach. What kind of uncomfortable questions? The kind that suggest she might be getting help from someone with technical expertise. Voss replied, I'll need authorization to expand our investigation. You have it, Damian said immediately. Use whatever resources necessary. This leak needs to be plugged before it does any more damage. After Voss left, father and daughter sat in tense silence. Finally, Serafina spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you going to do to her? To this Nira Salas, whatever is necessary to protect this company. Damian replied, Serafina, you need to understand something. We're not the villains in this story. We're the ones keeping civilization running. Sometimes that requires making difficult choices. Difficult choices like murdering grieving mothers. No one said anything about murder, but the words carried. The cantina on Blackwater Station existed in the kind of perpetual twilight that attracted those who preferred to conduct their business away from prying eyes. Smoke from a dozen different worlds created a haze that seemed to absorb light and sound, while the low hum of conversations in various languages provided perfect cover for sensitive discussions. It was exactly the kind of place where Orion Blackthorne felt most at home. He sat alone at a corner table, nursing a glass of Altarian whiskey and watching the door with the casual alertness of someone who had made too many enemies to ever truly relax. At 31, Orion had spent nearly half his life on the wrong side of galactic law, building a reputation as a smuggler, pirate, and general thorn in the side of corporate authority. His ship, the Crimson Vendetta, was known throughout the Outer Rim as a vessel that could outrun almost anything and whose captain would take any job. If the price was right, almost any job. Orion had his lines, and over the years, those lines had become increasingly firm. Captain Blackthorne? The voice belonged to a young woman who had approached his table without him noticing, an impressive feat that immediately commanded his respect. She was perhaps 25. With auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that held a mixture of determination and barely controlled fear. I'm Vera Mitchell. I sent you the message. Orion gestured to the empty chair across from him, his dark eyes studying her carefully. She was well dressed, but not ostentatiously so, and she moved with the kind of careful precision that suggested either military training or recent trauma. You're not what I expected when someone offers to pay 1,000,000 credits for passage to the Middle Rim. What did you expect? Vera asked, settling into the chair and glancing nervously around the cantina. Corporate security, bounty hunters, maybe a very elaborate setup by the Trade Commission. Orion's smile was sharp and predatory. Someone desperate enough to offer that kind of money for what should be a routine passenger run is usually running from something significant. Vera's laugh was bitter. You could say that. I'm running from my father. Family disputes can be expensive, Orion observed, refilling his glass from the bottle on the table, though usually not million credit expensive. What does Daddy do for a living? He runs Nexus Industries. The words hit the cantina like a physical force. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and Orion felt every muscle in his body tense involuntarily. Around them, patrons began to quietly vacate nearby tables, unwilling to be associated with whatever was about to unfold. Well, Orion said after a long moment, his voice carefully neutral, that explains the generous compensation package. Vera, or rather, Serafina Cross, as he now realized, leaned forward urgently. I have information. Evidence of systematic negligence and cover-ups that spans dozens of worlds. People are dying because of my family's policies, and when I tried to address it internally, they threatened to eliminate the sources. Orion studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. He'd dealt with enough corporate types to recognize their tells. But Serafina seemed genuinely distressed. More importantly, she seemed angry, the kind of deep, righteous anger that could drive someone to abandon everything they'd ever known. Why me? He asked. There are plenty of passenger ships that could get you to the Middle Rim without the drama. Why hire a pirate with a reputation for causing trouble? Because you're not on their payroll, Serafina replied immediately. Do you have any idea how many supposedly independent operators receive funding from Nexus subsidiaries? How many captains owe their licenses to corporate influence? I needed someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated, and you think that's me? Serafina's smile was grim. You hijacked 3 Nexus cargo haulers last year alone. You distributed their medical supplies to plague victims on Kepler Station, instead of selling them on the black market. Either you're completely insane, or you have principles that can't be bought. Orion was quiet for a long moment, memories flickering through his mind. Kepler Station had been a nightmare. A plague outbreak that the corporations had ignored because the affected population couldn't afford treatment. He'd watched children die while cargo holds full of medicine sat in orbital warehouses, waiting for insurance settlements and bureaucratic approvals. That was different. He said finally, that was personal. This is personal too, Serafina insisted. Every accident report I've seen, every cover-up memo, every casualty list, they're all personal to someone. I have a chance to make it stop, but I need help. Before Orion could respond, his communicator buzzed with an urgent message from his ship. The sender was his first mate, Isabella Santos, a former Alliance Navy officer who had joined his crew after being court-martialed for refusing to fire on civilian targets. Boss, we've got company. Corporate security just docked 3 berths down. Full tactical gear. Asking questions about passenger manifests. Might want to expedite whatever business you're conducting. Orion cursed softly and stood, dropping credits on the table. Looks like your father works fast. We need to move. The journey from the cantina to the docking bay was tense but uneventful. Orion led Serafina through a maze of service corridors and maintenance tunnels that he'd memorized during previous visits to Blackwater Station. His crew was already preparing for immediate departure when they arrived at the Crimson Vendetta. The ship itself was a modified Corsair-class frigate, its sleek lines marred by the addition of extra weapons systems and reinforced armor plating. She wasn't the prettiest vessel in the fleet, but she was fast, well-armed, and had never failed to get her crew out of trouble. Isabella, this is our passenger, Orion said as they boarded. Miss Cross, meet my first mate, Isabella Santos. Isabella was a compact woman in her early 30s, with short black hair and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of military service. She looked Serafina up and down with professional assessment before nodding curtly. Ma'am, hope you're not expecting luxury accommodations. I'm expecting to stay alive, Serafina replied. Luxury is negotiable. As the Vendetta powered up and prepared to depart, Orion found himself studying his passenger more carefully. She sat in the co-pilot's chair, watching the pre-flight procedures, with obvious fascination despite her circumstances. There was something about her intelligence and strength that reminded him of someone from his past. "You've never been on a ship like this before," he observed. "Corporate yachts are very different," Serafina admitted. "Everything is automated, sterile. This feels more alive." "She's a good ship," Orion said, his voice carrying genuine affection. "Been my home for 8 years now. Saved my life more times than I can count." They cleared Blackwater stations, traffic control zone without incident, but Orion knew their problems were just beginning. Nexus Industries had resources that most governments could only dream of, and they wouldn't hesitate to use them to retrieve their wayward heiress. "Where exactly are we going?" Isabella asked from the navigation station. Serafina pulled out a data pad and projected a star chart. "Verdania. There's someone there I need to meet. Someone who's been documenting my family's crimes." Orion recognized the name of Backwater Agricultural World in Nexus-controlled space. It was exactly the kind of place where corporate security could operate with impunity, far from the oversight of galactic authorities. "That's hostile territory," he warned. "Nexus practically owns that entire system. The moment we drop out of hyperspace, they'll know we're there." "I know," Serafina said quietly. "But there's a woman named Nira Salas who lost her son because of our negligence. She's been trying to expose the truth, and now she's in danger because of it. I can't just abandon her." Something in her voice made Orion look at her more carefully. This wasn't just about corporate reform or personal rebellion. This was about guilt, about a young woman trying to atone for sins she hadn't committed, but had inherited nonetheless. "Tell me about this son," he said. Serafina's expression grew pained. "Cale Salas, 19 years old, engineering apprentice. He was killed in a structural collapse at one of our extraction facilities. But before he died, he was documenting safety violations, building a case against us, I think. I think they killed him to keep him quiet." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Around the bridge, Orion's crew exchanged glances. They were all outlaws, people who had chosen to operate outside the law for their own reasons. But there were still lines they wouldn't cross. "How do you know all this?" Isabella asked. "Because I've been reviewing the files, the internal reports, the cover-up memos, the orders to substitute substandard materials." Serafina's voice was getting stronger, more determined. "My father thinks he's protecting civilization by cutting costs and maximizing efficiency. What he's really doing is building an empire on the graves of innocent people." Orion made his decision. "All right, Miss Cross, we'll get you to Verdania. But once we're there, we do this my way. No heroic gestures, no unnecessary risks. We get your information, extract anyone who needs extracting, and get out before corporate security can organize a response." "Agreed," Serafina said immediately. "Thank you." As the Crimson Vendetta jumped to hyperspace, beginning the journey toward Verdania, Orion found himself thinking about the choices that had led him to this moment.